This afternoon, especially significant given my bio. Those of you in the room, I'm sure nobody else was watching, but Ireland have just beaten Wales to qualify for the World Cup playoffs. That happened a few minutes ago, which was good news. I thought I'd share that, as many of you were probably waiting. Many of you are probably waiting for the result. Okay, so I'm going to talk about library collections. There's been a very distinguished set of speakers in this series. And there's been some sort of very general and deep discussion about libraries and their direction. So that's all going to change now. And I'm going to be really quite specific about some ways in which libraries are changing, but it's very collections oriented. It's focused on collections, but trying to put that in the context of some of these more general trends and more general directions. I'm very pleased that the Thomases are here. Very pleased also that Shirley Baker is here, and that this series is in honor of Shirley. This is a photograph from an indeterminate period. Shirley for many years worked with OCLC and was a very important contributor to the organization, and we were very pleased to partner with her and this institution on that. So I'm very pleased to be here today. She is there with Barbara Gubbin, a public librarian, and 3 hirsute men. So this is a library. This is probably, when you look at stock pictures of libraries, you know, when CNN wants a picture of a library, this is usually the library that comes up. About 50% of libraries in the media are this library. You know, when you have the newspaper article about, you know, is the book dead, and they want a library, this is the library. This is the long room in Trinity College, Dublin. And it's where the Book of Kells is. And normally there are no people in it. Normally you just see the long room without any people. I was there during the summer, and I took this picture, which is why it's a bit blurry. And it was interesting just because there's people in it. Of course, the people are tourists. They're not there to use the library. They're there to see the Book of Kells and the various statues, and hopefully to buy things in the gift shop on the way out. But I thought it was interesting because this is, if you like, the archetypal library. This libraries basically are places with wood and books in them. I mean, that's the archetypal library. And when we think about that type of library and the books in the library, you know, for a long time, the measurement of a good library was a library with lots of books in it, because in a physical world, you had to actually put the stuff near the people. So what the library did was it assembled lots of stuff and put it near the people that wanted to use it. And the mark of a good library was a library that assembled more stuff than other libraries, because that made the life of students and faculty easier, because they could prospect a local collection, a mountain of stuff near them. They didn't have to go far away, they didn't have to wait, they didn't have to do other things. So very much in the print world, the better the library, I mean, it had lots of wood in it, but the better the library, the more books it had in it. And this is a quote: research libraries achieved status by acquiring more than their peers, or by building niche collections of particular depth. And the association of libraries with their collections and the association of libraries with books remains very strong. Those of you with college-going children who are receiving all of this literature, enticing you to go to this or that college, it's quite surprising still the number of institutions that boast about the number of volumes in their library. You know, we have a lazy river, a climbing wall, and a library with 3 million volumes. You know, that's the type of inducement that sort of comes through. Also, in job ads, it's still quite interesting seeing the number of volumes in the library quite often mentioned. You know, wonderful quality of life and a library with 3 million volumes. So that equation is still really quite strong. Now, the quote is from somebody called Dan Hazen, who was a collection specialist in Harvard. Now, those of you who are familiar with the library in Harvard know that it is the biggest library, academic library, you know, and that they have all of these books there. Lots and lots of books. And they have a huge budget. And they have lots of librarians to look after the books. And Hazen was very much a specialist in collection development and building that collection. But this is what he wrote a few years ago. Having said, yes, research libraries acquire prestige and distinction through virtue of the size of their collection. Collections no longer lie at the center of research library operations and goals, even as academic communities focus ever more inclusively on knowledge and information. So he's not saying that collections aren't important, he's merely saying that the collection, the equation of the collection and the library is no longer one that holds in quite the same way as it used to, because the library now does a variety of other things in the context of supporting the research and learning life of its institution. And if you think about what types of things the library does, this is my favorite library website. So this is from Monash University in Melbourne in Australia. And this is just a screenshot of the homepage, and I've put a couple of things here. What's interesting about it is that most library websites are a search box and a straggle of services, or a straggle of services and a search box. What you have here is the search box is actually down here somewhere. It's not what's on the top of the library. And what they're trying to do is to tell a story about what it is that the library now does. And if you think about the story that they're telling, they're saying that there are libraries, and by libraries here they mean physical places, that there are physical places, there are social spaces, there are spaces where you can interact with expertise, where you can interact with specialist services, where you can interact with exhibitions, where you can interact with your colleagues, with your students in various ways. There are collections, and they go on to say something about their collections and why they have those particular collections. But then, and very importantly, what they want to say is, this library is about research and learning skills. So they are about student success, they're about retention, they're about helping students do what they need to do in college well, and they have a variety of ways of doing that. Then they have something called managing research data, and this is quite specialist, and it's interesting that it gets up here on this top level. So by managing research data, they mean managing research data, but in the context more broadly of researcher support. They're there to support faculty be more productive. They're there to support the scientific and research enterprise of the institution. And they do this by providing a variety of ways in terms of research workflow and related services to help with those things. Then they have services and facilities, you know, that's where the photocopier is and those types of things. Many library websites you have, you know, photocopier, research support, you know, whatever. So what they're trying to do is to tell a story. Now, new generation libraries is because they have new building. It's not because they're saying this is a new generation library. And they're saying that the library is there to inspire to reach for the stars, to find, analyze, use, and manage knowledge, to build your skills for study and work. And if you think about research and learning skills, managing research data, this is very much about giving you the tools, the skills, the workflow to help you succeed as a student or to help you succeed as a researcher. So they're trying to tell a slightly different story about the library, and I think quite a subtle way from the website point of view. When you drill down on any of those things, they actually do try and tell a story. It's not just links. They talk about those things. So against that background, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about three ways in which collections are changing in sort of broad ways, and not focusing in on, you know, demand-driven acquisition or, you know, serials crisis or whatever, but talk about the ways in which collections are changing in broad ways because of broad environmental issues in the research and learning space that libraries occupy. And these three broad trends in relation to collections relate to inside-out collections, facilitated collections, and then collective collection. And I'll walk through each of those in turn. This is another library website. This is Purdue. And I quite like it because it sort of shows these three things up front on the website. So what you have on the top is the search box that Monash had pushed down, but that most libraries have front and center on top. And basically, it's to find articles, books, media, journals, collections, and archives. So it's to find outside-in stuff. It's to find the stuff that the library buys and acquires and brings to the library and organizes. So typically, that's the outside-in collection, the collection that the library buys, the library acquires, the library licenses, the library brings to the institution. If you look at the other stuff that's on this page, you have what I'm calling the inside-out collection. And one of the reasons I like this is that it presents it in these three buckets, which are which sort of map onto, you know, common ways of thinking about this. And it's quite nice the way they have these three repositories sort of sitting there. So they have something called Purdue ePubs, which is an institutional repository. Typically, many libraries have these. So this is faculty preprints, working papers, the type, you know, the documents, the open access repository, the preprint literature. Then they have eArchives, which is special collections and archives, digitized special collections and archives. These are very distinctive to the institution. By definition, almost, they're unique or rare, and the library has them. And then you have something they call PUR, which is a platform for research data. Purdue has invested a lot in research data management locally, in helping its faculty meet various mandates, but also from the point of view of local curation, disclosure with the world, managing research data locally. So it's quite interesting seeing the three of them laid out in that way. And this is what I mean by inside out. This is about university assets. It's about university materials, about things that are distinctive or special about the institution. And what you want to do with these things, to some extent, is share them with the rest of the world. The stuff up there is in the rest of the world, and you want to bring it into the institution. You want to share these things with the rest of the world. You also want your own campus constituency to use them and engage with them. But they're also part of the reputation of the institution. You want to promote the work of the institution and share those materials with the world. What they have typically here is they have a range of subject guides, and I'll say something about that. So they're saying, you know, there are lots of things that are potentially of interest that we don't have in our collection. Let us help you find them. And then they have a collective collection. Very important. This is a Big Ten institution. Very important to the Big Ten is you can access the Big Ten collection as if it were your own collection. You can, and they have this system. You borrow. You request something and it's with you in 2 days or some short amount of time. And a very popular service, very heavily used, but it sort of extends their local library to the Big Ten level. They have access to the Big Ten, they have access to the Big Ten collective collection in Purdue almost as easily as they have access to their own collection. So I'm going to talk about those types of things, and I think the Purdue website nicely shows them. So 3 trends. Research work is being reconfigured by the network digital environment. This means the library is being called on to support local research flows in different ways, but also to share the outputs of that research in different ways. The whole information space has been reconfigured by the network, the digital environment. That means that the local assembly of a big collection no longer satisfies many information requirements. So you have to think about how do you facilitate access to other types of material, to material elsewhere. And then reconfiguration of library collaboration by the network, by the digital environment. Increasingly, for many materials, libraries are seeing that the local collection, the local owned or licensed collection, is something that can be managed locally, but increasingly libraries are looking at ways of managing their collections, managing their assets collectively within groups of libraries. Okay. So the first of those, inside-out collection, reconfiguration of research work by the network. And I'll say a little bit about these four things. So research outputs. If you think about the library and you think about publishing historically, it focused on outcomes. It focused on testament, if you like, to the work that is captured in the article that's published, in the book that's published. The final outcome, that sort of, it's almost like an exhibition of the work in the article or the book. And that's what libraries capture, that's what they put in their collections. All the rest, all the other outputs of the research or of learning were sort of invisible because they weren't brought into this digital environment. What's happened in the last few years is that people are also interested in methods, or they're interested in the software that people has used, they're interested in experimental methods, they're interested in a variety of things like that. They're interested in evidence, and this is partly supported by mandates in a variety of places, evidence meaning the data itself, the research data that may have been generated in a particular context. And they're interested in discussion. There may be working papers, there may be blogs, there may be forums, there may be a variety of other things. So if you think about the actual process of research, the process of research now generates a variety of interim outputs that are becoming the subject of curation or disclosure or reputation in some way. So the actual process of research entered, and at the same time the aftermath of research has also become something of interest in the context of discussion about materials, maybe in venues or forums which are captured. You have revisions, you have reuses, compilations, a variety of things. One of the reasons that copyright is of interest is in the context of these types of further uses. So what has happened in the last few years is that process of research has become something that's much more supported by workflows in a digital environment in a variety of ways which call forward thinking about curation services, thinking about discovery services. At the same time, you've got all of these funder mandates, and you've got all of these NSF or government mandates in other contexts about open research, about making research data or other artifacts available. So if you think about some of the services that have emerged in the last few years, if you think about methods, Methods X, I think, is a publication from Elsevier. My Experiment is a UK service that aggregates details of experiments, Apache Taverna, workflow management, Figshare, research data management, GitHub, a lot of scientific software on GitHub, the software created to do experiments and other things. Dryad, of course, a research data repository for a particular journal. So you have a whole range of services appearing to manage these types of things. Archive.org for preprints, clearly the most successful, but a whole range of other services here as well. You could put hundreds of services up there. and at the same time then, a bit more diffusely maybe, range of services beginning to appear which look at that sort of aftermath. So in this environment, what's happening is research libraries are increasingly looking, especially at the process of research, and thinking about what types of services are required there, both from the point of view of supporting workflow, but also from the point of view of thinking about research data, preprints, the variety of artifacts that are produced in that research process. Now, clearly, this is very big, very complicated. People are different, disciplines are different, so it's all moving very quickly. But it's somewhere where libraries are beginning to move. Second area I mentioned is expertise, reputation. There is a profiling system here, become very much of interest in the context of university rankings, in the context of, again, reputation, disclosing expertise. And what you're seeing among some faculty is this sort of blurring of identity, workflow, and content, in the sense that it's important to keep various profiles up to date. It's important to push out new work in ResearchGate, which is obviously very, very much in the news the last few days. Quite of interest, some people may have seen Springer Nature has now announced that it's in discussion with ResearchGate to try and come to an arrangement, while at the same time another group of publishers is talking about suing ResearchGate. So really quite interesting dynamic going on there. But if you think about local expertise or profiling systems, the big take-up of research information management systems on campuses, the heavy use of ResearchGate, Google Scholar, a variety of disciplinary approaches. Really a lot of work here, and it's an area where libraries increasingly are getting involved or interest, partly because of the bibliographic element. A large part of this is managing that campus bibliography on one side or individual bibliographies on the other side. So what we're seeing in the context, this is the third, is this emergence of sort of a research infrastructure. And this is sort of relates to library interests. I mean, clearly you have much broader research infrastructure. But you have research data management, you have research information management expertise, profiling, faculty reporting types of systems. You have the institutional repository, historically the place where open access material was put. And then a range of services emerging to support digital scholarship in a variety of ways. So you've got this set of services emerging in different configurations in different ways on different campuses, and clearly a whole range of partners involved in that type of activity. And really, how the library is inserted into this depends on local circumstances and history. And you have, people interested in this, clearly researchers, research support from the library or other places, and increasingly, the sort of research manager type role within an office of sponsored research or wherever that might sit. So what we're seeing is research libraries increasingly interested in this a range of services, while at the same time, large publishers are. So this is a quote from Annette Thomas, who now works for Thomson Reuters. At the time, she was CEO of Macmillan Publishers. So her view is that publishers are here to make the scientific research process more effective by helping them keep up to date, find colleagues, plan experiments, and then share their results. After they've published, the process continues with gaining a reputation, obtaining funds, finding collaborators, and even finding a new job. What can we as publishers do to address some of scientists' pain points? Now, the interesting thing to me about this quote is, so Sarah Thomas gave this lecture before. You could replace Annette Thomas with Sarah Thomas there. Her view is that librarians are here to make the scientific research process more effective by helping them keep up to date, blah, 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 blah. So what you have is the large publishers, and two in particular, Elsevier and then Springer Nature. Springer Nature is part of Holtzbrinck. Holtzbrinck owns 53% or something of Springer Nature. Holtzbrinck also owns Digital Science, the set of companies Figshare, Altmetric, Symplectic, ReadCube, this set of small companies that have really made a big splash in sort of scientific workflow recently. So when you think about Springer Nature, Digital Science, the rest of the Holtzbrinck activity, and then you think about what Elsevier has been doing in the last couple of years, it's very clear that she's right. What you have is Elsevier and Springer Nature moving. Publishing is a part of what they do and a major part of what they do, but what they're doing is they're diversifying their offer across the full researcher life cycle. And they're partly doing it because they want, library budgets tend to be, like this, so they need to find money from other parts of the campus, but then also their focus is this. Their focus is the actual scientist pain point, acknowledging again that science is very diverse, very various. So if you think about Elsevier and what Elsevier has been doing in the last few years, Elsevier now has a range of products that support the individual researcher, the librarian, and then the research manager, we'll call that role on campus. And they've made some very high-profile acquisitions recently. So what you have is the original focus, we'll say, on publishing, Science Direct, Scopus to some. They've moved upstream in the university into administration to provide research analytics, university analytics, to provide, sort of expertise services. They've moved sort of downstream into the research process. And, those of you who track this will be aware in the last couple of years they have bought HiveBench, a lab notebook product. A few weeks ago they bought bpress, the institutional repository product, expertise profiling product. A while ago they bought Plum Analytics, the analytics service. They made very high-profile acquisition of SSRN, the social science sort of preprints network service. And a few years ago, they bought Mendeley, the reference management service. And what they're now doing is building a whole suite of end-user, of researcher services on top of Mendeley, looking at research data, discovery tools, at the same time as building up this sort of analytics type of back end, while continuing with the publishing, being the biggest publisher. So what you have is really this diversification across the whole life cycle. From a library point of view, from a university point of view, I think the focus on the institutional repository and to some extent on open access has obscured the fact that this is happening. If you think about Springer Nature and then put up the digital science companies, there's that sort of same spread. So the large publishers diversifying to provide scholarly workflow services. And if you think about how these relate to library services, quite an interesting question. Finally, I mentioned special collections. I think this is quite a nice example because it's sort of connecting special collections with the reputation of the institution and with newer skills. This is a set, these are wine labels. This is a UC Davis project. So they have a collection of wine labels going back many years. And what they've been doing recently is taking the wine labels, digitizing them, and then trying to mine them to look at the history of wine production, the ways in which wine production have changed. So what they're doing is they're showing the value of the library in the context of some of the newer skills that are emerging, but also they're trying to connect that to something that is of primary importance to UC Davis, which is wine, as an academic interest. As I was preparing for this, I was looking at the website, and I just tweeted this quote from the material around the sort of new Thomas Gallery exhibition spaces. I'm a somewhat desultory tweeter, and I don't have a huge, but I was interested. For me, this is a huge amount of interest. that's a signal, that people actually saw it, But I was quite interested, again, this goes back to this, it's special collections coming out into the light, special collections being a focus of engagement, of expertise, of reputation. And I think it's very much in line with what I was saying. So what we're seeing is research work is being reconfigured by the network, by the digital environment. That means that support for creation, management, and disclosure of evidence, of campus memory, of community becomes much more important, and I've been calling that inside-out collection. And I think, this raises, various things to think about. One is workflow is the new content. That's, it's a bit glib, but I quite like it. Increasingly, content is consumed and generated by various workflow tools, and that's why you have Elsevier and Springer Nature focusing so much on supporting workflow of various sorts, and it's an interesting question for the library. The role of collections, the role of research data, scientific material, whatever, sharing that with the world, the role of that in the context of institutional reputation, institutional presence on the network, quite interesting. You think about the effort that some individuals put into doing that. We're seeing the library is always focused on discovery of the stuff out there. Increasingly has to focus on the discoverability of the stuff that is generated within the institution itself. And finally, the third point I'm going to come on to, all of this raises the issue of collective collections. What should be done locally and what should be done in the context of broader groups, and I come back to that. That's a little used feature of PowerPoint. We could just stay here. So the second point I wanted to make, and I'll do it more quickly, is so the information space itself has been reconfigured in a major way. And if the information space is configured, then you expect the library to behave differently, don't you? Because the library can't provide everything. So what does the library do? So if you think about, what people use, all of these, I won't go through them, but disciplinary repositories, you think about what people use, what students use, what faculty use, Google Scholar, Google Books, Mendeley ResearchGate, Goodreads Library Thing, and so on. I was amazed. My son is in college now, but when he began doing chemistry homework, I was amazed. The first thing he did was he just pasted the question into Yahoo Answers. Because he said, all of these questions, nobody makes up questions, they just all, so he just pasted the question into Yahoo Answers and see, and quite often he'd find the problem worked out or whatever. Even though he had a vague sense that this was cheating, it didn't really seem to him to be cheating, so. Figshare, OpenRefine with data, GitHub from a software management point of view. So, and you're all familiar with, the huge variety of services that you use to get things done that, 20, 30 years ago would have been sort of library things, but they're just things now. And I think, partly in response to this, I think the emergence of LibGuides has been amazing. LibGuides, for those who don't know, sort of simple content management system that's used in many libraries. One of the major purposes is to generate sort of resource guides, lists of resources that might be of interest to you as an anthropology student but they've exploded. You go to any library site and, you look at it today and there's 20 resource guides there, you come back next week, there's 400 or something, it's like, they're like tribbles, in that Star Trek thing, they just grow and grow, you've got all these LibGuides. But what's interesting about it also is they're being presented, this is from MIT, they're being presented increasingly as in conjunction with library expertise. One of the things I think that's become very clear to libraries over the last few years is that if you're, I have to pause to make sure I get this right. If your expertise is not visible, then you won't be seen as expert. So there's been a big push to make expertise visible. And I think one of the ways in which this has manifested itself is through LibGuides. Obviously, lots of other ways in terms of being more visible on campus and so on. So resource guides, really interesting, but I mean, not so much interesting themselves as symptomatic of the fact that there are all these resources that just aren't in library collections that you want to tell your users about. So in terms of thinking about the facilitated collection, a long time ago, the library basically had the owned collection. And that was in the context of this print logic. You bought stuff and you put it near your people, purchased and physically stored. And we're moving to a situation where increasingly you've got a facilitated collection where you're meeting research and learning needs in the best way that you can. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you buy stuff and put it on a shelf over here. And if you look at what's happened over the years, so here the value related to the assembled collection, and here the value relates to how you actually help people get their job done. So we're moving from this sense that the library is an owned collection to one that it's facilitated. And our collections are actually much more facilitated than we realize because the effort that goes into that is diffused across a variety of places. And different libraries will have different investments across this. So, we began with the borrowed collection, a recognition that the library couldn't own everything, some stuff had to be borrowed. Then we moved in a big way into the licensed collection, so the larger part of the library budget is now spent licensing things rather than buying things. We're now in a situation where we have demand-driven collection. It used to be the case that you would use a discovery service to find out what was in the collection, so the collection drove discovery. Now what's happening is discovery is driving the collection. If people find things they're interested in, well, shouldn't we buy them? So we have this big interest in demand-driven collection and systems and services to support that. And then increasingly we're seeing the emergence of shared print collections where libraries are merging their print collections, shared digital collections where libraries are merging their digital collections, and scholarly records where libraries are moving various of their data about preprints and so on into shared services. And they're providing access to, there may be proxied access to Google Scholar, including freely available ebooks in the catalog, creating resource guides for materials elsewhere. So what you've got is, we still have this mental model of the library as buying things or licensing things and putting it in. But in fact, when you look at the totality of library activity, stuff has moved across here. And but this tends to happen in lots of places. The view on campus, the view among some of the constituency is sort of maybe still focused to some extent on this or this and this. But really the library is investing a large amount of time in that full spectrum. So what this means is I think you've got increasing amount of time going into facilitation, which means that people are thinking about what they have locally in slightly more specialized ways. Should we put more attention on being a bit more specialist here? I think this is a good example. Bowling Green State University north of us in Columbus. This is not a special collection, but it's a specialized collection. It's a collection around popular culture, which is a research interest of the institution, and they sort of build it up. Not a special collection, but specialized. So what you have, because of increased facilitation, more specialization of locally held collections, drives engagement because it flows from a sense of what it is that students and faculty want, what they need, It does mean that the responsibility for stewardship is more diffused, and again it pushes you towards collective collections, which I'll speak about in a minute, or now. So the third area, collective collections. And this is partly about right scaling. In some ways, in a digital environment, the institution is no longer the right level to do certain things. So this is about reconfiguration of library collaboration. Okay, so this is a map of the US, or North America, or part of North America. And it takes Richard Florida's areas, the sort of geographer, economist, economic geographer. And as various people will know, he's defined these mega regions in North America based on concentrations of economic activity, educational, cultural activity. So you've got this range of mega regions. And what we've done is we got the zip codes from Richard, Florida for the mega regions, and we mapped it to library collections. So this is where the North American library print collection resides. And as you would expect, most of it resides in the mega regions. Most of it resides in Northeast North America. That yellow circle, US extra regional, that's where St. Louis is. So that's the collections that are in areas that are not part of a mega region. So what this shows is what you might expect, that collections are actually quite concentrated, and they're concentrated in the areas that you expect. If you put up a map of beer and wine drinking, it sort of looks the same, because people drink beer and wine where they live. It's like the guy who was asked, why does he rob banks? It's because that's where the money is. But so this is where library collections are. It's quite striking, though, the concentration up there. Now, I like this picture because we did it a few years ago, and I think it had one unintended consequence. It showed people that, beforehand, people thought collections were like this big ocean. You couldn't get your arms around them. They went on forever. Print collections, how could you count them? They're like, grains of sand. What this did was actually count the print collection and show people where it was, so it became more like a reservoir. Became more like something that you could manage, you could think about in a sort of more concrete way. And that's actually what's happening. So those of you who've been following this know that there are a variety of organizations now in each of these areas beginning to look at managing, as individual libraries manage down print, looking at how to collaborate around managing shared collections. Washington University is in one of these collaborations in the extensively named West.
Western Library Alliance.
But this is West. I was just thinking, they have these names that aren't really very extensible, like West and East. And so Washington is the easternmost member of West. And what these libraries are doing is trying to figure out together how to manage that collective print collection. Individually, many of them are managing down that collection, but collectively they feel a responsibility to the scholarly record, to responsible management of that. And we're seeing this across the US. I mean, we reckon that within 5 to 10 years, a large part of the North American print collection will be in shared stewardship, maybe more than half. And it's happening because of developments like those on this campus, that space is being reconfigured around experiences rather than around collections. There's a requirement to use space in different ways, while at the same time, while those print collections are enormously valuable to some faculty, the overall value that's being released from them is declining as time goes on, especially these big long runs of print journals. So there's a general move to manage down print, to move it into shared environment. So collective collection, a system-wide organization of collections, whether the system is a consortium, region, or a country. And as I say, we're beginning to see the infrastructure being put in place to help manage that. And that means then that you have questions about, well, where does this activity happen? We're neighbors with Ohio State, which is, I was going to say they're the Macy's in the mall in Ohio Link, but it's probably not an analogy that they'd welcome given the current state of retail. They are the major land-grant, public university in Ohio. They have a responsibility to the state, so Ohio Link is important to them. They want to, but at the same time, they're in the Big Ten Academic Alliance, and they're in Hattie Trust, the group set up to manage digitized book materials. So where do they manage this aggregation of print materials? Similar question here, maybe not a lot happening here at the moment, but certainly something happening here and your members here. Now the same question is emerging in relation, for example, to research data management. So University of Toronto manages research data locally, manages it at the Ontario level, and manages it at the Canada level. So we're sort of beginning to sort of try and figure out where and how do these things get managed, but also how do they relate to the whole range of other things that are happening. And, you know, you're in shared relationships for borrowed, you're in shared relationships for print, but then you're in shared relationships for digital material, you know, materials from here go up to Missouri Hub, go up to DPLA. You know, materials from here probably in all of these. So what we're seeing is this sort of emergence of a whole network of services and libraries sort of participating in them in various levels. And an emerging question over the next few years is, you know, really where should that collective or collaborative investment go? So what's happening with collective collection is a large part of the existing print collection will move into shared stewardship in the next few years. Agreements emerging around retention and sharing there. At the same time, those inside-out collections, the research data, the e-prints, the special collections, they're being aggregated in network-level hubs. Lots of questions about the viability of those hubs, the direction, the ownership, the whatever. So really questions about what will happen there. Do you continue to invest in those? Do you leave everything to Google? And all the time, these questions about what scale do you do things at and how do you actually work together to get things done. So just to conclude, you know, saying three trends in the information environment. Research work, the information space, library collaboration, all being impacted by the network. And this is making us think about collections in different ways, thinking about the materials that are distinctive and unique to the institution, to the research workflows that consume and generate interim outputs, thinking about actually mapping onto what people want to use, when they want to use it, and then really thinking about how we manage our assets increasingly in that collective level. So how to create, manage, and make discoverable institutional materials, how to actually assemble a range of services that meet research and learning needs, and how to think about managing print collections, digital collections, research data in more coordinated and collaborative ways. So these are three big questions and three big directions for collections. And I'll stop there. Thank you.